6. As the allies parted to go about their tasks, Lear lingered with Shyle. He embraced her and they stood as still as a pair of trees. "What did you mean you will fade? Are you going to die?" he asked her. "No, but I will not be able to go very far before I sleep. I will sleep for many decades. You will not see me again. Your kind have shorter lives. These are our last hours together," Shyle whispered, "and I regret them not." Lear bit back the words he wished to say. Instead of the stoic character of his Cimmerian kin, he stroked her body with his palms and spent his time committing the moment to his memory. His hands remembered her shape, his nose her scent. She did not have a heartbeat, for her body did not push what passed for blood through it. "Is there nothing that can be done?" he asked. "No. I was forced to carry too much of the men's seed. I have borne too many fruits. Like a tree in winter, I must rest now, or I will wither," she replied. "What must be done?" he asked her. "I wish to sleep under the open sky, not in this tomb," Shyle replied. "Then it will be so," Lear said. "Far away from this place, away from Hotchkanook's domain," she said. "Then I must go make it possible," Lear said. He moved to leave, and she stayed him. She picked up the rock, the sharp one stained with blood, and with it she sheared off a thick lock of her hair. This she wound with unearthly speed and skill into a braided loop. She handed it to Lear, who took it and nodded. He kissed her, and they had to make an effort of will to part. Then they strode into the night. When Lear came to the gate, he saw that Arnak and Oak had slain the two guards. They had strangled the Picts and prevented them from making any noise. Oak took their knives, which were flint-napped instruments, so that the women she would free would have some weaponry to begin the rebellion. Arnak took one of the spears and one of the men's hatchets. He handed the other spear and a bone club to Lear. Arnak whispered, "This will be far different than sparring with staves." "I have fought in a war before," Lear replied. "I am well aware of which end of the spear is thrust into the other man's belly." "Well then, good hunting, friend Lear. May your ancestors watch over you," Arnak said to him. "Good hunting, friend Arnak. May you bring your ancestors many deeds to boast of," Lear returned. Then they parted ways and padded into the night to bring about their plan. Lear marveled at the grace with which Shyle moved. She was naturally quiet and seemed to instinctively know how to stalk. They flitted from shadow to shadow. As they neared the first sentries that Arnak had marked out on the map, Lear wished he could spare her from what had to happen. They hunkered down in the shadows and waited. The sentries passed by the Cimmerian and the hidden wife without a care in the world. Why should they be afraid? They were in their own country, within the borders of a secure camp. The Cimmerian slaves had been cowed, and the shaman was generous with his rewards. As they passed by, the sentries spoke of how they each wished to rape one of the slaves. They never saw Lear rise behind them with his club, nor Shyle with her jagged stone. The bone's club's blow went straight down upon the soft part of the Pictish guard's head. There was a cracking sound as the club splintered from the force of the blow. 2 years' worth of outrage and the strength of a blacksmith gave the stroke even more weight. The sentry dropped to his knees as his skull parted, and the gray matter of his brain fell into his own eyes. Shyle's target had no time to register the action, for the sharp and uneven edge of the stone tore across his throat, causing his veins to drench him in his own blood. Lear hefted the bodies and placed them out of sight. He took Shyle's hand and made eye contact with her to see if the deed had harmed her psyche. He expected to find regret or guilt there as Oak had experienced. Instead, he saw only a neutral expression upon Shyle's face. A quick squeeze of her hand was the only comfort they would have time to afford. Soon they were leapfrogging from shadow to shadow to get near the next place the sentries would pass. The second pair of men went down as easily as the first. They repeated the process, and Lear hoped that Oak and Arnak were also faring as easily as Shyle and he. The third pair of the sentries put up slightly more resistance, and Lear had to repeatedly stab his target with one of the man's flint knives. The progress continued till Shyle and Lear were in position to spy upon Hotchkanook's hut. They lay in the dark, waiting to see if Arnak and Oak would reach them. The minutes crawled by until Arnak arrived. "Oak is working on the pen where the women are kept. She asks us to wait an hour for her to spread the word. Then the women she trusts will strike the men that hold them captive in the night," Arnak whispered. "Risky, but not a bad plan," Lear commented. "I see that the Hotchkanook's most favored hunters are still celebrating with him," Arnak said. They are very loud. They smell of rotten fruit, Shaw commented as she wrinkled her nose. They make a sour beer out of the forest fruits and woad, Lear commented. Something in the mixture makes them wild and prone to hallucinations. Then this should be easier, Arnak said. I have also seen it increase Hotchkiss' powers, Lear said. Arnak muttered a curse that involved pine cones and bodily orifices. Pine, Lear whispered. His tone was full of hopeful inspiration. What about it? Arnak asked. Lear sniffed the air. He looked at the longhouse and smiled. It was indeed made of felled timbers of pine with a thatch roof. Hotchkiss had made the longhouse out of the wood that was ideal kindling. The longhouse was a new building, only finished within the last month. The pine tar inside the logs was still fresh. And flammable. Lear turned his gaze to Arnak, and the Pict noted the look of malicious glee upon the Cimmerian's face. We need the oil from the forge. We are going to spread it all around the longhouse. Then we are going to burn the bastard and all his ilk alive, Lear hissed. The women inside? Arnak asked. Will run out when the hutch catches fire. The guards will exit behind them. We stab the guards as they emerge, Lear whispered. One of us will need to soak the edge of the hut with the oil. I am quieter than you are. I'll do it. What does oil look like? Arnak asked. I'll get it in return, Lear said. He left Shyle and Arnak there to watch the longhouse. He sprinted from shadow and cover to quickly attain the forge. Sitting in a great vat there was a reservoir of oil. They would not need the entire vat, but 2 or 3 jars of the liquid would give them what they needed for their holocaust. Lear opened the lid of the reservoir and began dipping out the oil into the jars with a ladle. He was halfway done with his task when he heard someone approaching. He looked up to see Kalukar walking towards the forge with a Cimmerian slave woman in tow. The boy had a proud look on his face, and Lear did not have to imagine why. The woman showed no signs of distress, but Lear could feel the anger that was revealed in her every step. Kalukar approached Lear and dragged the woman to her knees. He had bound the woman's hands with a lead rope and stood behind her. Good news, friend Lear. Hotchkiss the shaman has given me a slave to keep, Kalukar said. She is mine to do with as I wish. Lear continued to pour the oil into the clay pots. He hoped it appeared that he was obeying a command. That is good for you, Kalukar. The shaman has declared that you are a hunter? Lear asked. Yes, I go on my first hunt tomorrow with the other men. He has let me celebrate early with my gift of a slave, Kalukar preened. Lear made himself smile. He could not afford to be detected. Aren't you supposed to be in the arms of a woman as well? Kalukar asked. She rebuffed me. I was not good enough for her, Lear lied. Oh, the shaman will not like that. She will be punished, surely, Kalukar said. Then he kicked the Cimmerian woman to her hands and her elbows. He lifted her tunic so that her rump was exposed. I have come to admire you, Lear. If you like, you can share my slave tonight, Kalukar offered. Lear finished pouring the oil into the pot he held, and realized he had no way to verbally refuse the boy. He walked behind his anvil and palmed a light hammer into his hand. Holding it behind his forearm, he approached and walked behind the kneeling woman. She is a lovely slave, Lear said. She wriggles more than she should, but I am sure you can break her, Kalukar said. Get it over with, you weakling. I may be a slave, but at least I am a Cimmerian. You want to be a pit, the woman spat. And why wouldn't he? Kalukar snarled. He hauled the woman's head back cruelly by her hair. We Picts are the most noble race to ever... He had no time to finish the sentence. For as Kalukar cranked her neck backward, Lear let the hammers slip down, revealing it to the woman's sight. Her eyes went wide in recognition, and this warned Kalukar that something was happening behind him. Lear had meant his sideways blow to crease the back of Kalukar's head, but as the boy turned, the hammer met his temple instead. Kalukar's skull cracked, and the hammer crushed into his brain. He tried to gargle a response, but could not. Lear's hand withdrew, and the hammer sped forward again, and again, and again as if he were pounding upon a nail. Lear looked down upon the ruin of Kalukar's skull, and could not tell if he was revolted by the gore or that part of him that had been friendly with a man who could rape. He let the hammer fall to the ground, and he rose, The slave woman was huddled against the anvil, hoping that he did not turn his ire on her. Lear knelt and extended his left hand to her, the only one clear of any filth. "We are escaping tonight. Bring those pots with you," he commanded. "They will catch us," she hissed. "They that would try to stop us, we will speed on their way to meet whatever they worship that passes for a god." "Come," Lear prompted. "Branwen," she replied. "Lear," he gave her his name in turn. "There is work to do." They rose from the forge and slunk back through the shadows of the village. When Lear and Branwen arrived at the place where Arnak and Shael waited, Branwen almost bolted away in fright. Lear's firm grip on her elbow brought her forward. The Cimmerian woman was still reluctant to remain. "Peace! They are allies," Lear hissed at her. They, Branwen stammered, "are no friends of the shaman. We mean to kill him and flee with all of your kin we can save," Arnak told her. "Why would you care?" Branwen hissed. Hatred of Arnak's kind was laced in her voice. "Hachkanuk is a monster, and he must die. Otherwise he will lead many good Pictish men and women to their deaths, not to mention what he has planned for the Cimmerians and the East." Arnak tried to reassure her. Then he turned to Lear. "You brought it?" "I did. We need to saturate the base of the longhouse as well as splash it along the walls," Lear commented. "I will go to my task. You get a fire source ready," Arnak whispered. "And what in Crom's name is that?" Branwen asked as she pointed to Shael. "Kimmer," Shael said with approval. "She is also an ally," Lear explained to Branwen. "You do not need to aid us, but you need to remain silent as we do this, or we are all lost." I am not a coward," Branwen hissed. "No one is claiming you are, brave woman," Arnak said to her. Then he vaulted towards the longhouse, with a jug of oil under each arm. He quickly skittered along the side of the building, looking a bit like a crab intent upon arson. None inside noticed his splashing of the oil along the sides of the pine logs. Arnak risked a single glance inside the windows of the house to see who was inside. Hachkanuk was indeed in his chair, a viper coiled about his arm. He petted it and demonstrated his power over the creature. The Picts watched in reverence. Upon each of their drooling and addled faces, Arnak saw adoration. The Pictish women had all left but one, and the slave women that remained were only 4 in number. 40 or 50 strong warriors sat inside the house. Arnak returned to his task. He finished saturating the longhouse and returned to his allies. Lear had kindled a small fire with some twigs and kindling. He then sheltered the small flame from sight and peered through the darkness. To Lear, still under the effects of Shael's painted magic, the darkness was not a hindrance. He easily spied Oak coming their way. He did not stop to wonder that he now thought of her by that name rather than Grania. She and another pair of Cimmerian women arrived. They carried the javelin-like spears the Picts favored in bundles. Stone clubs, bone clubs, and hatchets complemented this, as well as a few good sharp steel knives Lear had fashioned while he was a slave. If these new women shared Branwen's reservations, they did not show it. "Many that would chase us will never wake. The women I could free are making their way to the east and await us," Oak whispered. "Then it is time," Arnak said. "Wait," Shael said. She stopped them with a motion of her hand. She traced the sign of Jebel Sag in the air and then pointed her hand towards the longhouse. "For a time, the shaman will have none but his most loyal servants to answer his call. But you must act quickly," she whispered to Lear. Lear handed the fire to Arnak, who dipped an oil-soaked javelin into the source, and then threw it with unerring accuracy. The javelin wobbled in the wood of the soaked pine. A few seconds later, the fire spread, and it raced around the entire base of the building. It took a minute longer for those inside to recognize their peril, for though the fire started quickly, the logs were thick, and it took a few moments for the fire to truly blaze. It was not the smoke that gave away the fire's presence, but the light. The longhouse was full of smoke already from cook fires, but seeing the light change from the outside of the window's edges, and then the beginnings of the thatch above them starting to kindle, the Picts inside panicked. The first Pict that exited the door got 2 javelins, one hurled by Lear and the other by one of the Cimmerian women, in his gut. He slumped, and the men behind him caught flying barbs from Arnak and Oak. As he reached to grab another javelin, Arnak admired Oak's throwing form and strength. "It was a good throw," he complimented her, unsure as to why he did so. "Later," she ordered him. They both had a scant second to feel awkward that she had commanded him. Her master Then they returned to the assault. A pile of picks now lay in front of the longhouse door. A few tried to escape from the windows, only to find those ways also pelted by javelins. One picked, more crafty than the others, attempted to walk out of the blaze with a Cimmerian slave before him as a shield. "Duck, sister," Bramwin called. When the woman did, the surprised pick behind her found that he had sprouted 3 feet of bone-barbed javelin in his chest. The slave woman ran across the distance, and when she arrived near Lear and his allies, she too picked up a javelin and began pick hunting. They could not afford to remain for long. The roof aided them. Quickly catching a flame, it collapsed inside, and the screams of those that were there could easily be heard. Lear and his allies ran, and the blacksmith noticed that they had added more new women to their party. Each of the Cimmerian slaves, true daughters of their race, had not shirked from combat and fought their way to freedom. When Lear and his companions arrived at the meeting place, they discovered that the freed women had not been idle. Haversacks full of primitive tools, scraps of leather and bone, and many spare pairs of the moccasin-like shoes the Picts wore, as well as chap-like breeches, were waiting for them. The Cimmerian women had also armed themselves with whatever they could find. Here a steel hatchet of Lear's make, there a simple hefty branch to serve as a club. Each woman had been taken unarmed and by surprise. Each woman had resolved not to let that happen again. Arnak paused when he saw them. How did Hotchkanook ever catch these people? Only by his powers, surely. They cannot be held, Arnak thought. A few of the women greeted the newcomers, but none of them looked particularly fond of their Pictish companion. One began to raise her weapon before Oak stood in front of Arnak. Oak, known to them as Grania, said, "He has freed us, and he knows of a place where we can set an ambush for those that harmed us, a place filled with weapons, food, and clothing. You need him, even if you hate him." "And what of that?" one of the women asked as she pointed to Shyle. "She will only accompany us part of the way," Lear said. The Cimmerian women shared some quick and silent stares in the dark, each debating if it were not better to risk the forest on their own. But as ever, Cimmerian pragmatism won over enmity. Lear pointed for Arnak to lead the way. "Follow me. Be silent and do not stray," Arnak commanded them. Then he began to lead them away from the camp of Hotchkanook. Oak walked behind Arnak as the other women filed after him, sullen yet hopeful. At the tail of this human snake, Lear and Shyle remained. Bramwin walked in front of them, occasionally looking at the green woman with a mixture of superstitious dread and curiosity. The night journey through the forest was surreal. All around the escapees, the forest serenaded them with nightbird songs. Insects flew by, their humming wings causing the occasional duck of a head. The moonlight did not seep through the canopy in any great amount, so often the women tripped or lost a step. They made good time considering that many of them had not eaten well, had been beaten, and the darkness hindered them. Each of the women was highly alert and seeking threats in the darkness. A great hunting cat appeared for a moment on the trail. It approached Bramwin from the rear, and she had just enough time to hear it growl. But Lear moved between them and locked eyes with the great cat. It paused. Its growling ceased. He still wore the mark of its kind upon his face, and he could interpret its needs. With a raised palm before him, he stopped the panther in its tracks. The beast then bowed its head, placing the top of its head upon the soil and bending forward as a man might bow. Then it retreated into the night. "How did you do that?" Bramwin asked. She was clearly afraid. "The beast is gone," Lear replied evasively. Let us continue." Bramwin glanced again at Shyle, and neither Shyle nor Lear saw her revulsion when Shyle took Lear's hand in her own. An hour before the dawn was to rise, they came to the place that Arnak had picked. A waterfall that fell perhaps 50 feet into a pool greeted them. It was fed by a creek, and the women took this moment to bathe and rest. A few women began a small fire to boil the water. Then they filled water skins with the sanitized water for a journey eastward that may never come. As the women began their work, Arnak busied himself allocating the weapons that had been stashed there. There were javelins, throwing darts, slings with stones, and a few good stout back bows with arrows. Arnak divided these amongst the women. Missing, though, were any spears and other close combat weapons. Arnak at first despaired, until from a corner of his eye he noticed that some Cimmerian women had already begun to cut down saplings with the steel hatchets they had taken. Points on these crude spears were soon shaped and then placed over the fires to harden. He became aware that Oak had stolen up beside him. "Your kind are industrious," Arnak said to Oak. "We are taught, when we are young, never to be idle," she commented. She hovered near him and longed to touch him, but did not do so where the others could see. "We will pile up the ammunition on this ridge and pelt them when they arrive," Arnak said. "Won't the Picts know that we could do that? Won't they prepare, knowing the ground as they do?" she asked Arnak. "Perhaps. Let us hope they are as dim-witted as all of Hotchkinuck's crows appear to be," he replied. "We should confer with Lear," Oak said. Let the boy have this hour," Arnak replied. Dawn was soon to arrive, and he had not forgotten what Shyle had told them about her remaining time. Intuiting his reasons, Oak nodded. In a place where the women could not see, Lear and Shyle reclined against a tree. Her steps had become faltering, and her breathing was labored. Lear was trying not to weep in front of her. Tears would do no one any good now. "What are you thinking?" she asked him. "That when you awaken, I will be here with your kin," he said to her. "I already told you, I will sleep for many decades, perhaps even more than a century," she said. "Let me have my dream." "And dream of me in turn," he said to her. She rose from his embrace and kissed him lightly, then whispered, "Always." Shaw rose from their repose, and on halting steps she approached a rotting tree in which the trunk had split open. It was an oak, old and scarred by lightning, that had not yet given up its fight with death. She made her way into the hollow. She smiled back at Lear, and as the sun crested the horizon, its first rays illuminated her face. She sighed, finally caressed by that source of life she had been crafted to receive the bounty of. Then her skin seemed to change, and the green of her skin faded into a brown and motley tan. The metamorphosis that rapidly changed her melded her with the oak. Lear touched the trunk, and he softly chanted the song she had taught him, forever making this place and this tree part of the songline he would remember forever. He whispered to her in her slumber, "Be there any device under the heavens or upon the earth that I shall be here when you wake, I swear it by my will, by my blood, and by Crom the Uncaring as my witness. I will find it." He then allowed himself a minute or two to grieve for the loss of the first woman who had ever loved him, before he rose and erased the evidence of his sorrow. Then Lear turned his mind to the task of how to kill the Picts that were surely coming, and because Crom could be uncaring and just cruelly with Cimmerian lives, Lear also began to ponder how he would kill the shaman should Hotchkinuck have survived the fire. The fire had been a neat answer to a problem that Lear had suffered ever since Hotchkinuck had captured him. He had been recognized by the shaman as a fellow shaman, and as such, Hotchkinuck could not curse Lear nor harm him under the ethics of the Picts. The protection this had offered Lear had also protected the shaman from Lear's ire. Yet the fire had been a very neat way around the problem, for the fire was not a curse, and by setting it, Lear was not technically the one harming Hotchkinuck. The oath of protection had been sworn before the gods of the Picts upon a holy site they had corrupted. Should Lear break the taboo, likely the gods of Pictlin would have their revenge. "I must find a way to slay him, that mine is not the hand wielding the spear, nor the one cursing him with the black arts," Lear whispered to himself. There was one exit to this conundrum. Should Hotchkinuck accept the challenge of a duel, then Lear and he could kill each other with impunity, but only if the weapon was that of the spear. Lear had learned this while he had been enslaved, and it was one of the reasons he had allowed the Pictish boys to drag him into their stick game. It was the only outlet he had access to that might give him some insights into spear fighting. Cimmerians could be said to be in love with their steel swords. Picts adored their war spears. To them, the simplicity of the weapon and the intricate dance of using it in combat was the highest form of art. He lamented that he found none of the herbs the Druids' incense smoke required. He had looked for them along the path, but they were absent. Either Hotchkinuck had scouts remove these herbs as they grew, or the plants simply did not grow in this part of Pickland. Lear would have given much to have the benefit of the protective smoke the incense was supposed to provide. As he passed back down the escarpment, he noticed another rotting tree that sheltered a massive hive of bees. He watched them for a moment. Then he poured out some water from his water skin and washed his face where Shyle had marked him. He dipped his fingers into a pouch full of woad paint and marked his face with part of the symbol of Jebel Sag. Turning again towards the hive, he calmed his mind. Once it was empty, he pondered the image of a bee. He recited to himself all that he knew of the insect and how it lived. He opened his eyes and was not surprised to see a circle of the insects flying in a pattern in front of him. The swarm was responding to his mental query. They would make good allies against the Picts, who often forsook armor and heavy clothing. Lear could sense a deep uneasiness, a nameless regret that two men calling upon the ancient forces of the land and animal totems were about to do battle. Yet he could also sense that there was a quiet acceptance by whatever godly presence was watching Lear's movements. Lear had grown up without a god watching his every move. The sensation proved very disconcerting to him. He wondered what madness drove civilized people to desire such attention from their deities. They were very tired, almost completely exhausted, yet Arnak and Oak found the strength to quickly bring down some birds and snare a pair of rabbits. Arnak watched as Oak quickly broke the necks of the trapped rabbits and strung them. "It is not enough," she commented. "We only need a little. If we survive the night, we can begin proper foraging," Arnak replied. Oak nodded, and he sensed a question in her silence. "What is it?" he asked her. She cut off her thought, then shook her head. 100 or more howling madmen are about to attack us. Speak your mind, woman, Arnak commanded. At his tone, something in her flared up in anger. She stood and pushed him away from her. Or she meant to. Instead, she ended up holding onto his shirt. Grania looked into Arnak's eyes, and in the laden silence, she asked him a question with her glance. He clearly did not understand, being a clueless man, so she decided to make the question evident by her deeds. And she kissed him. She had meant it to be a momentary query into his feelings. The kiss, however, was not fleeting. As her hands roamed Arnak's body and his hands roamed hers, Grania knew that for her part a decision had been made. When they broke the kiss, she looked into Arnak's eyes and saw that he was surprised that he too had decided that she was his and that he was hers. This will not be allowed in your homeland, Arnak whispered. She nodded and leaned against him. She whispered, I will go wherever you go. Arnak let them have a few precious moments, with only the woodland as a witness. Arnak had no way to know for sure how his tribe would react. He feared his ancestors would be angry with him. Arnak also had no way to know that at least one of their ancestors, miles away and sitting aloof on his stone throne, nodded in approval. Lear had fallen into a slumber and had not realized it. His first sense that he was in the dreaming world was the way the colors scintillated over the grass. The bees appeared as bright golden orbs flying through an opaque sea of daylight. The Cimmerian women were surrounded by auras of azure and brown. Unlike his first scrying dream, there were now sounds and scents, as well as sights. The women of his homeland smelled of the earth. They smelled of the rivers, the mountain springs, and the first flowers that bloom after winter. Animals stalked in the glowing dream world. Their auras were various shades of orange, tinted with a slight yellow. The world of the dream was somehow more real and less real to him than his waking experience. He looked down at his slumbering body and knew he could awaken if he wished. Then he felt a rumbling growl pass through the earth beneath his feet. It was a warning. Lear wondered if it was the voice of the Pictish animal god whose mark he had just learned. The sound rumbled again, this time sounding a bit like a hound's mournful wail. It drew his attention to the west. Lear felt his mind caught up by a flying bird, a hawk perhaps. It carried his dreaming mind towards the west and high above the forest floor. He looked down on the weirdly illuminated canopy and saw foul colors shining beneath its bounty. A great, angry light, tinted with red fury, was searching through the woods. It emanated from a dark splotch of foul-smelling blackness. It was the corrupt magic of Hachkanuk, which clung to him and blighted the spirit world so. He was not far away, perhaps only a mile. Dark red blotches, Hachkanuk's corrupt Picts, trailing behind the other darkness of their master, were approaching. Lear saw that between each of the dark red blobs of an advancing Pict, a thin tendril of darkness stretched back to the shaman. Great hunting cats, their natural radiance enveloped by the shaman's darkness, stalked alongside the marching men. The rumble he had felt through the earth gave Lear one last parting rumble of satisfaction. It had done its part and shown Lear whom it desired slain. Lear was to be the form of nature's justice against Hachkanuk for sins against the world that had given him life. The filaments of the dark bonds Hachkanuk had stretched between him and his servants were taut. Lear knew the shaman was tasking himself to his utmost. The bonds looked as if all it would take is the merest pressure on them, and they would snap. Lear woke with a start and saw that Arnak and Oak had returned. The women were all sipping a rabbit broth from a gourd dipper. Lear rose and motioned for the women to pay attention to him. They circled around him. He recalled the admonitions he had read upon the wooden tablets about how to address men when they were about to go into war. Out there, less than a mile away, our captors come seeking us. They will find us no matter where or how we run. The only choice is to fight them here. If you run, you may live for an hour or a day, but their wrath when they find you will be greater than before. We must, all of us, fight. We must slay them here. If any wishes to speak, now is the time, said Lear. How do you know they are here? Branwen asked. I dreamed it, Lear answered honestly. Ever since they attempted to sacrifice me at the Monument Hill, I see things in my dreams that come true. The Cimmerian women hid their disgust, except for Branwen, who out of fear of Lear moved behind the woman she was nearest. The shaman drives his men before him. He wishes my head more than any of yours. Do not fight him. Let the shaman, or anything he commands, come after me, and I will keep its attention off of you, Lear commanded. What do you intend to do? Arnak asked. Lear pointed to a hollow in the rock face near where the waterfall fell. He said, I will wait for him there. They will have to come after me one at a time, and it will give me a narrow gap I can hold against any animal he may send against me. If there are too many, we cannot hold. You will be left behind, Arnak said. There are already too many, but I think I know how I can aid us. When the shaman gets close enough, I think I can break his hold on the minds of the animals, perhaps even that of his men as well. But I will need to be hidden to do this. If you must retreat, do so in good order, and do not give away my position. Failing all else, perhaps I can stab him with my dagger, Lear said. Wait a minute, we are to fight while you... what? Murmur spells and make hand motions? Branwen spat. Lear closed his eyes, and he let his mind call to the bees. They responded and flew to him, landing on his skin in a great swarm so that he was covered in them. When they covered his chest like a shirt, the Cimmerian women all backed up a step in fear. He peered at Branwen. The shaman made the mistake of showing me his trade. Now I will use it against him, Lear replied. The women left his presence then, each regarding him now with a mixture of awe and fear. The bees flew away from Lear and landed in one of the nearby trees to await his summons. Arnak and Oak remained, unsure but not afraid. You can really do this? Arnak asked. I can try. Hachkanuk is older and wiser at this game. To succeed, I will need surprise, Lear responded. We'll give it to you, Oak said. Then she embraced Lear and said, Kinsman,